Well, good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Brian Tooma. I'm the Assistant Director for the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency, and today we've set aside some time to discuss the 2016 State Homeland Security Grant Program, and we wanted to convene our subject matter expert groups and do an orientation with the participants because this is somewhat of a relatively new addition to the process. We've modified the process somewhat from what we've done in the past, and we felt this would be a good opportunity to engage folks on the various aspects and requirements of the program. First of all, I do want to thank everybody for your participation. Again, we've modified the process. Stakeholder engagement is a critical issue. And so we appreciate the fact that you're willing to do this and assist us with the process. We have an agenda for this afternoon. We'll get into that shortly, but I thought what we would do is do staff introductions. So we're going to go around our table here. We have both members of NEMA as well as the Public Policy Center. So I will start with Quinn.
Quinn Lewandowski, University of Nebraska Public Policy Center. I'm also monitoring the Zoom chat.
Denise Bulling, Public Policy Center.
I'm Dan Hiller with NEMA.
I'm Sue Krogman with NEMA.
I'm Janelle Welter with the Public Policy Center.
Mark DeCry, Public Policy Center.
Ryan Lowry with the Public Policy Center and NEMA.
Nikki Weber with the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency.
Julie Mayers with NEMA.
Hey, thank you. So a lot of those names should sound familiar to you. What we would like to do is, again, remind everybody if you're not talking, please put your phones on mute. And then any offline conversations that anybody wants to have with members of NEMA or the Public Policy Center, we'll certainly entertain questions after the session is over. You can feel free to call us. And again, you have the capability with this system. If you want to ask a question online, pose it to the group. We will certainly entertain those as well. So for today, the intent is to really review the Homeland Security Grant Program guidelines as we know them to date. Nikki will be covering some of that information, the most recent grant guidance that we can provide you. We also want to spend some time reviewing the timelines behind the grant process for this year. And finally, just to answer or address any questions or concerns the subject matter expert groups might have relative to the process or to the grant itself. I have a couple of, I guess, issues that I would like to speak to today. One is to do kind of a brief historical perspective on the Homeland Security Grant for Nebraska because it has evolved over time. And then also to address the grant process, managing certain expectations and identifying some of the priorities. So if we look at our grant over time, again, it has evolved considerably. We went from a period where there was significant funding available to the states, to local entities. That funding has dried up, at least in the form that we see. The allocations to the states have been greatly reduced. Our UASCs, some of the more highly populated metropolitan areas of the United States, continue to receive significant dollars, but primarily what we see across the United States, states are surviving essentially on a baseline appropriation from Congress based on your threat assessment. So we've seen it go from a lot of money available for programs to more of a baseline appropriation. The grants were very equipment centric early on. Over time that has changed. We saw that change considerably after Katrina, where there was considerable emphasis being placed on preparedness measures, the planning, exercising, and training activities. And we also went from a period where the country was trying to respond to terrorist attacks. There was a lot of urgency, a lot of exigent circumstances to address. And so we went from a philosophy of trying to address issues on a near-term logic to now we see a maturing process and the federal folks are asking us to really focus in on sustainability measures. So all those have had some bearing on our grant and the process that we use. Some things that we have accomplished with the grant, and it has changed considerably over time. We've seen a significant investment in equipment purchases. If we look at our hazmat, our bomb techs, or IED issues, and obviously law enforcement. We did create a fusion center, and we created a system where we could support information sharing. There's been a considerable investment in the public health networks, the medical response capabilities, and there's been considerable improvement in the coordination of those issues across the state of Nebraska. We've focused in on a lot of communications issues, including NRIN. To date, since about 2008, we've appropriated over $9 million to help support the construction of the NRIN project. There's more work that remains to be done on that project. I do think it represents a significant or a very important piece of infrastructure for the state of Nebraska to address some interoperability issues, as well as reducing the cost for data and for information services. And finally, planning, exercising, and training initiatives have been focused on supporting the National Preparedness Plan and the National Response Framework, and both those are very critical to our overall Homeland Security program and emergency management in the state of Nebraska. The 2016 Homeland Security grant process, I think there's a couple of important issues that we really need to speak to today, or I need to speak to. The first one, again, is managing expectation, and the second one is identifying priorities. So in terms of managing expectations, I think the one question that comes to people's mind is, how do we leverage a finite resource to meet all the requirements or the expectations of our stakeholders? And how do we address decisions at the state and local level that are intended to address the expectations of the Department of Homeland Security? Essentially, what we're trying to do is make sure that Nebraska's Homeland Security program or our initiatives comply with the expectations of the federal government. So some of those expectations include the Fusion Center or our ability to develop information sharing capabilities. The other priority is the anti-terrorism resources for law enforcement. In the program, we're required to do a THIRA, or a threat hazard identification risk assessment. We have to do a training exercise and planning workshop. We do a state preparedness report, which outlines our Homeland Security program. We have certain investment justifications that we have to develop through your input. We have local or regional stakeholder engagement initiatives to engage you folks at both the state and the local level. And then we're trying to, again, focus in on the preparedness requirements and the sustainability planning. I do want to talk about funding or the allocation or the distribution of the grant dollars. Here, again, our dilemma is that we have $3.7 million available. In 2015, we had almost $9 million in requests. So that translates into a significant amount of competition for the dollars, or a lot of competition amongst folks for the philosophies or the types of projects that are being proposed. So that makes the allocation of dollars somewhat difficult. The other issue is what I call the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the dollars are supposed to be distributed to the local jurisdictions and 20% retained by the state of Nebraska. Excuse me. So the 80-20 rule, 80% of those dollars being distributed to the local jurisdictions complicates the ability to fund statewide initiatives. So what I want to emphasize here is that for the 2016 grant, the decision to require MOUs will be based on identifying champions in the individual PET regions to support a project. So in other words, we may have a project that's a statewide project, but we'll try to identify one PET region to be the champion, as opposed to distributing the allocation of funds from 8 different PET regions. So that's one change, I guess, to the process that we're making. The other one is that the regions will not be required to MOU dollars for any specific project. We do have to allow 25% of the total grant for the law enforcement projects. So the law enforcement subject matter expert group will play a critical role in that process. And they will have a number of issues to identify in their deliberations. Finally, I want to talk to the role that NEMA plays as a state administrative agency or agent. First of all, we have grant administration requirements we have to address. So things like ensuring that the funding requirements associated with the grant are being met, that our funds are utilized for the purpose that they're intended, that the sub-grantees can account for the dollars they are allocated. So those are just the financial requirements that's associated with the grant. But aside from that, we also have a statutory role to support the Director of Homeland Security. And we also do that in conjunction with the Homeland Security Policy Group and the Senior Advisory Committee. So what I want to emphasize there is that you folks play a critical role in the process, in the way that the projects are going to be reviewed and prioritized, but that is done in conjunction with the Director of Homeland Security and the various oversight groups. I do want to spend some time talking about priorities. This year, we are trying to modify the process so it's a more transparent process. You folks as stakeholders will be a part of the review process and have a role in the prioritization of those projects. Your recommendations will be vetted to the Senior Advisory Committee and then reviewed once again by the Homeland Security Policy Group. So the goal here is to achieve consensus on a very competitive process in trying to meet all the competing interests or to address all the various components of our Homeland Security program. Throughout the process, NEMA and the Public Policy Center will provide coordination, provide advice to assist you folks as you move through the process. I want to emphasize again that the process must support regional or local investment strategies as a part of our overall Homeland Security grant program. Your participation, your perspectives are critical to this effort. And finally, the decisions that are made during the process do have to be focused on a couple of issues. One is the sustainability of the projects. I've mentioned that repeatedly. Or the investment justifications that have been adopted by the state of Nebraska. State of Nebraska means all the stakeholder groups. Those are the requirements that have been articulated by the Department of Homeland Security for this grant. And again, a reminder that we're trying to address preparedness and planning and have the capability to execute those requirements. So there are other folks in this room that are going to provide more detailed information on the program and the process. Again, I want to thank everybody for your participation. Again, if you have questions that you would feel more comfortable posing to us offline, we're prepared to take those questions. And so, again, thank you for your participation, and I'm going to move on in the agenda.
This is Denise Bulling, and this slide that you're seeing right now is an overview of the process this year. The work plans were sent out by NEMA, or the project plans, at the end of January, due back at the end of February. So, and the other thing that was due at the end of February was an identification of everybody for those work groups. So you've all been identified as being on the subject matter expert groups. The month of March is spent reviewing the work plans and proposing priorities within those lists of plans. Key dates, April 15th, Nebraska's investment justifications are due. And by April 25th, the complete application must be submitted. I'm going to turn it over to Nikki for a minute to talk a little bit. We'll talk more about the subject matter expert groups in a moment, but Nikki, if you'd like to talk about the grant requirements, the national priorities, state priorities, and what the grant specific grant is asking for this year, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. So every year, the Department of Homeland Security issues a NOFO, or a Notice of Funding Opportunity announcement. We call it grant guidance for short. Within the grant guidance, the DHS initiates and spells out what the national priorities are. Those are for all grantees across the United States, so every state must comply with these. So they spell them out. You will see, if you are familiar with last year's grant guidance, there are no big changes. Cybersecurity obviously being one of them. Infrastructure systems, access control and identify verification, economic recovery, housing, long-term vulnerability and reduction. Those are key elements that DHS saw throughout all of the state and regional FIRAs. Those are key aspects that must be addressed in every state when submitting for this grant. So to show projects and investment justifications, they're going to support achievement towards those is critical. Moving on now to the state priorities, so Nebraska specific, based on the State Preparedness Report, or the SPR, informed by state and regional THIRA results. So those regional THIRAs that you completed last year or a year before that, those come into play here along with our state preparedness report. So the goals and objectives that were identified that you wanted to achieve, those absolutely must be addressed within this grant. This year they're wanting even more specific than they have in years past. They want to know down to the month when you want to get things done by, when you anticipate on getting projects completed, and what it's going to take. Within each project, something new this year, they're wanting to see an element in your project on how you're going to use these dollars. That may sound very elementary, but they're wanting to know what is your exact intent with these grant dollars. So being very generic is no longer going to cut it with all the states. They're requiring more specific information. And then, of course, just as Brian alluded to earlier, sustainability of investments is prioritized over new projects. That was the same as in last year as well. The grant guidance from DHS was very specific on that, that was sustainment and maintenance were key priorities for projects. Just as we've sent out before in the past, you can see the link there. You can go to FEMA and you can see the actual grant guidance document language. Next slide is the Nebraska priority areas. Those of you that are familiar with our grants, that have been involved with them in the past, you will notice those as those are the topics or key functional areas of our investment justifications that we submit. So just to break it down a little bit more clear, each PET region, or planning, exercise, or training region, are submitting and putting together projects, so specific projects that they intend to use the funds towards. What the investment justifications are an umbrella of functional areas that are going to be encompassing of those projects that you're developing right now. So that is why the investment justifications are written more broad to more encompass your project goals and objectives and your intent. So as you can see, those that are listed there, those are the ones that have been used since the birth of the Homeland Security Grant. Obviously, key for law enforcement, given that 25% of the grant must be spent on law enforcement terrorism prevention activities. Interoperable communications, planning, exercise, or training, or PET, agriculture, hazardous materials, citizen corps, and metropolitan medical response system. Okay. Grant requirements. Just as Brian alluded to earlier, 20% of the state, 20% of the funds can be retained at the state level. That is for all states across the nation that they may retain that much. And then 80% of the funds must be awarded to local jurisdictions or local units of government. Those of you that are new to the grant world, in 2008, all states across the nation had to put together a regionalized approach to the grant dollars. They didn't care what it looked like, but it needed to be a regional approach. So gone were the days of giving money directly to a jurisdiction, a local jurisdiction, and having them compete. It must be, the projects submitted must be for the benefit of the entire region that you fall within. 25% of the law enforcement dollars must be spent on law enforcement terrorism prevention activities. With that being said, out of our 20% that NEMA is allowed to retain out of this grant, we have and will continue to give 25% of our 20 towards law enforcement. And at the state level, we have given that and awarded that directly to the Fusion Center. And no surprise, the state of Nebraska, along with probably 23 other states in the nation, received the very same allocation award amount, or will be receiving the same award amount that we did last year, to the penny. Grant requirements and investment justifications must strongly address capability gaps identifying as state priorities in the most recent state preparedness report. So those of you that are familiar with that document or have seen that document, those still retain their importance and their value. They must still be met. Aligning to urban area, state, or regional THIRAs and national priorities. So the idea of pulling a project out of your hat to meet something locally, gone are those days. Now they must support the regional approach, so benefit of everyone in that region. Engage or impact the whole community. So again, this is the idea that not just one functional area within a region benefits from this grant, but that it reached down to the lowest common denominator, so all of the stakeholder involvement. Prevent a threaten or act of terrorism. So again, this grant is specific for preparing for acts of terrorism. So anything that is done with these grant dollars must have a terrorism focus or approach. There are other grants awarded by FEMA or DHS that are more broad in scope, but this specific grant must be geared towards that threat. Protect citizens, residents, visitors, and assets against the greatest threats and hazards. Again, that's going to come out of your regional THIRAs. What are your, what areas do you need to have focused on, and where are your gaps? Mitigate the loss of life and property by lessening the impact of future or catastrophic events. I know many of the regions have started the process of debris management plans, sustainment efforts on that approach. Those absolutely can be sustained and should be maintain a priority. Respond quickly to save lives, protect property and the environment, and meet basic human needs in the aftermath of a catastrophic incident. Recover through a focus on timely restoration, strengthening accessibility, and revitalization of infrastructure, housing and sustainable economy, as well as with the health, social, cultural, historic, and environmental fabric of communities affected by a catastrophic event. On that last one, I'd like to touch on this. We talked about this last year, that within your regions, it's not just your fire, your EMS, your law enforcement that have a stakeholder engagement in this process, but when you're putting together your plans, or if you're developing regional plans for exercises or training events, please keep in mind your minorities that live within your regions. Many of them are new to this country, new to your area, may not speak the language as fluently as some of us do, and they need to be well educated and sought out after as a peer from everyone. So please, when you're developing outreach tools or outreach resources, please keep that in mind of who lives in your community, who lives, works, and is educated in your community.
Okay, this is Denise again. The subject matter expert groups were designed to take a look at the projects that are submitted by all of the regions and the state agencies and to review them and prioritize them. Then essentially this is making a recommendation for the priority for funding, because we know that there is, or likely to be, more requests for funding than there is for actual dollars. So we decided to put together 4 subject matter expert groups, one in planning, exercise, and training, one reviewing all of the law enforcement dollars, so that anything that has to do with the 25%, even if it is planning, exercise, and training, will come to that is geared for law enforcement, will go to the law enforcement group. Anything related to Citizen Corps goes to the Citizen Corps group, and then the Nebraska Public Safety Communications Council will serve as the subject matter expert group for the communications projects. The process begins today with this orientation, and what will follow soon will be you will be contacted by a member of the Public Policy Center who will be sending you the project proposals. You'll be asked to personally review each of those project proposals, and you'll be given a link to an online survey tool where you will personally rate and prioritize the projects as you see them. We will take those priorities from individuals and aggregate them and send them out to all of the group members in your group, and that will form the basis of your discussions. The discussions for the Nebraska Public Safety Communications Council will take place on March 15th because they're subject to open meeting laws. You will receive the aggregate prior to that meeting so that you'll be prepared to discuss and make your recommendations for communication projects at that time. The other groups will be, there may be optional web-based discussions or phone discussions or in-person discussions that are held in addition to a final discussion to prioritize your projects. So that the information Nikki gave you today about the investment justifications can be used to prioritize them in your personal priority scheme, and then when we get together, we will lead a discussion to talk about additional criteria that you want to set as subject matter experts. There are a number of key dates, as we mentioned. This process must be complete before the meeting on March 15th for the communications projects. Law enforcement, I tentatively set a meeting for March 21st at noon. We'll have it online or on the phone and in Lincoln in person if you want to come to Lincoln, although you won't have to. If that is something that is not going to work for most people, then we can revisit that date, but I tentatively set that. That will be led by me and Kate Speck. The Planning Exercise Training Group has not yet determined a date, nor has Citizen Corps.
We do have a date.
You do have a date. What is the date, Mark?
It's March 16th at 1 o'clock.
Okay, so Planning Exercise Training, led by Mark DeCry and Janelle Walter, is March 16th at 1 o'clock Central Time. Sorry about that. I should have put that in. Citizen Corps, you do not have a date yet?
Not yet.
Okay, Ryan Lowry will be leading that group. The Metropolitan Medical Response System will be reviewed by NEMA. There will be no group for that investment justification. Another key date is April 14th from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock in Kearney. Stakeholders, in other words, all of the regions and any of the state agencies, will be invited to review your priorities. At that time, they will be given the opportunity to review and recommend adjustments to your priorities. And then in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, the Homeland Security Policy Group and Senior Advisory Committee will review both as a subject matter group, your priorities and the adjustments recommended by the stakeholders, and will make a final decision about the investment justifications that afternoon. NEMA must submit the investment justifications online via grants.gov on April 15th. So, this is a little bit different because the full grant application is not due until April 25th, but the investment justifications must be in on April 15th. The contacts and facilitators for your group are listed on the slide. As I mentioned, Mark and Janelle will be facilitating the PET Planning Exercise Training Group. Kate and I will be facilitating the law enforcement group. Ryan will be facilitating Citizen Corps. And then all of us will be working with the Nebraska Public Safety Communications Council. Denise and Mark will be taking primary responsibility for ensuring that you get your materials. You can expect communication by email from the facilitators of your group with sometime the first week of March with more explicit directions for your group. Nikki Weber will be receiving all of the project plans. Actually, Julie Mayers will be receiving the project plans, and we'll be dividing those out and sending the right ones to the right people so you have the right ones to review. We have a question?
Yes, we had a question on if the Senior Advisory Council would review before the policy group. It was said that it seems like the policy group ought to hear the reaction from the advisory committee before making recommendations.
Yes, the current plan is that the Senior Advisory Committee will meet with the Homeland Security Policy Group and will be engaged in the discussion with the policy group. So at 3 o'clock on April 14th, we will make it available for Senior Advisory Committee members and policy group members to be either in person or online for that discussion. This is not subject to open meeting laws, so we can do that. We realize that there's a lot of things going on that day in a lot of places. The idea or the intent is that the Senior Advisory Committee will be engaging in discussion about those recommendations with the policy group. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Brian, and I'm going to open it up for additional questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to ask, any of you?
Okay, we're at the point, if you have any questions, we'd like to address those now. And again, if you feel more comfortable trying to address a certain issue offline, we understand that, and you can give us a call at NEMA, at your convenience. Any questions from the field?
Not hearing any.
Not hearing any. Okay.
Is active shooter / mass shooting still a priority?
Yes, that would fall under the law enforcement terrorism prevention activities. Thank you to those of you that have submitted your work plan, your projects already. Julie Mayers has received quite a few of them already and has started preliminary reviewing of them just to make sure they have all the key components of the required form. So thank you. Julie's done quite a bit of work with this grant. So
I can think of maybe one question that might have come up recently, and that was through some discussions with some of the fire chiefs, and the question was posed to us about our sustainability of the MOU agreements with the 10 cities that support our hazmat program, and the concern about each entity competing against one another for dollars to support that hazmat program. We do not view that as a program where each of those cities is going to compete against one another for that program. We view that as a overall comprehensive effort, a project in and of itself. So we would propose that when that issue comes forward, that we will view it in the context of somebody being a champion to support that overall effort, and then the funding would be funneled through that single champion as opposed to trying to do it through 8 different pet regions. That question may come up later.
Okay. If you have additional questions, please contact NEMA. We are going to archive this recording and place it online so that it can be viewed by subject matter experts who are not able to attend in person. Thank you.